So this Nauru story is huge. It ought to be bigger than Pauline Hanson's burqa stunt, because this is shaping up as Labor's children overboard moment. Two governments, including ours, in breach of international law. It's got bikie gangs, it's got drugs, it's got fraud, $2.4 billion public spend of our money, frittered up against the wall. It's got goodies and baddies, but let's cut to the chase. What has actually happened here? Well, what's happened is that Australia is packing a bunch of asylum seekers off to the minuscule island of Nauru in the Pacific Ocean. These are criminals, and they may have a visa, usually a temporary visa, but they are not citizens. They're not true blue, in other words, so they're a good political target. The rationale is that they are criminals. Now, some have been convicted. What have they actually done, these people? They're men, they're all men. We'll get to that in a moment. Some have been convicted of minor offences, such as traffic violations, and others of drug offences, and some more serious crimes. One murder, although it was 23 years ago, and you get 20 years for murder, that's life, but mostly petty crime. We're talking driving offences. And they're offshoring. The offshoring of these political targets, these poor people, effectively means that they're imprisoned on a Pacific atoll for 30 years. Yes, Nauru has offered them 30-year visas. How kind. You get 20 years for murder. 20 years is a life sentence. Now, this is all good politically. Labor won't hear boo from the coalition, except perhaps on the money front, on administration, on admin things, not on treatment of human beings, because they are foreigners. And it makes the government look tough on crime, tough on borders. It's a winner politically.
Well, they don't have a visa. They already don't have a right to be in Australia. It's just because of our international responsibilities, we've had a view that we don't send them back to a place where we think there's a chance of them being persecuted. But that doesn't mean that Australia is the only country they can be in, and Nauru's been willing to help us with this.
These are the disposable people. Now, the problem for Albo is that his accomplice in this scam is the president of Nauru, David Adyang. Now, thanks to David Pocock and David Shoebridge in the Senate, thank heavens for the Senate, they're doing their job, keeping an eye on the uni party. Thanks to the Senate doing its job, reminding the government of a little thing called the rule of law, the government now appears to be complicit in an international fraud being perpetrated by Adyang, the president of Nauru. On Monday night, Senators Pocock and Shoebridge read into the Senate, read into Hansard, a translated interview with Nauru's president, Adyang. His claims about the $2.5 billion NZYQ resettlement deal, we'll get to NZYQ, what that is in a moment, it's an important one. The claims about this are so sensitive that the Australian government had secured a 10-year non-publication order. Courts had happily muzzled the truth for them. Then the next night, Senator David Shoebridge was back on his feet reading out another bombshell. This time it was previously unreleased 2022 report from AUSTRAC. This is the money laundering financial crimes regulator, AUSTRAC, financial intel agency. Now, it detailed, quote, a series of suspicious transactions from Nauru's current and past presidents dating January to September 2020. So, fraud. Let's cap that. The regulator has found the government to have known about these suspicious transactions. They knew. The government knew. Despite this, the controversial deal was signed in February 2025. Nauru was the only country willing to take the so-called NZYQ cohort, and the federal election was fast approaching. Hold that thought. What is NZYQ? Well, this refers to the Australian High Court's case, NZYQ versus the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. This ruling had it that indefinite detention for individuals with no real prospect of removal is unlawful. That is, the High Court, the highest court in our land, ruled that plonking people on a coral reef for 10 years longer for life and a half, is against the law. The case involved a stateless Rohingya man known by the pseudonym NZYQ, who is challenging his indefinite detention after completing a prison sentence for a serious crime. Now, the ruling led to the release of around 140 detainees and overturned the previous legal precedent that had allowed for such indefinite detention. But what have we got now? Would you want, let's take this Rohingya man. There's a genocide going on in Burma or Myanmar, as they call it now. If you were a Rohingya man, would you want to go back there right now and be genocided? It'd be like sending a Palestinian back to the occupied Palestinian territories. And there is one of those in the pipeline. Very sensitive, that one. The 358 men facing exile in Nauru now were initially released after the High Court of Australia ruled indefinite detention unlawful in November 2023. More than 300 are refugees, legitimate refugees that have fled violence in their countries, and the others are stateless. In other words, otherwise unable to be returned to their current countries of origin. No matter. Don't you worry about it, because Nauru's President David Adyang wants to pack them off anyway. He'll take our $2.4 billion and get the costs down on their detention by sending them back. Our man in Nauru, David Adyang. He wants to scam the Australian government, take our money and pack the refugees back to their countries of origin anyway. Now, where are they from, these men, these asylum seekers? They're all on temporary visas and they come from Iran, Sudan, Bangladesh, Syria, Iraq and Myanmar, fleeing the genocide. One Rohingya guy had 9 family members murdered, and he made it out of Burma, only to end up heading to Nauru for 30 years. There's Lebanese too, and one Palestinian, stateless Palestinian. Now, Israel won't let him in, obviously, and who'd want to go back to Gaza anyway right now? He probably hasn't got any friends or family left, and if he has, he won't have a house. He'll have a wet, cold tent. So that's not going to happen. That is a very sensitive one, mind you. We'll hear about a little bit more about that. But there's not much to go back to for these men. These men we're breaking the international laws for. Now, Alison Batterson, who's a human rights lawyer, you can check out our coverage by Alison and Janet Pelly on this incredible scam at Michael West Media, michaelwest.com.au. But Alison Batterson told us that every single one, she represents these refugees, every single one of them, she said, comes from a background of significant trauma and torture. That is unimaginable to the everyday Australian, male or female. All suffered sexual violence as a child. All of them. This is the lawyer and advocate for these victims of abuse. Now, many of them have gone on to offend, which is not good, but, ad absurdum, for a traffic offence to be sent to Nauru for 30 years, well, that's a bit overcooking it, despite the fact that it's also illegal. Now, there are no women in the cohort, NZYQ, so there's an interesting gender element here, presumably because they make better fodder if somebody in the mainstream media wants to kick up a fuss about the treatment of other human beings. We remember the Biloela family and the 2 little girls that have been in detention for years and now are living happily in an Australian community. So there are women on bridging visa Rs. That's what they're called, bridging visa Rs, R for removal. There are women on these visas, and so far none have been taken to Nauru. Only 5 men so far, with others ready to go. So the men are obviously scary and brown. They're not going to present a media problem. So there are no women targeted with the Nauru visa as yet. Now, ironically, some of these guys who are being packed off to Nauru have been linked to outlaw bikie gangs. So as one source told us, that effectively the government is sending them back to their employers because, of course, we saw in 60 Minutes, to give the mainstream media dues, they did a good job on this, exposing the Finks, the bikie gang, who got the security contract to run security for these people on Nauru.
coming up.
Pretty confronting. An outlaw motorcycle group running a company that had got a government contract.
Allegations of corruption.
Senior officials brag about rivers of gold.
Links to bikies.
Is outrageous.
Massive secrecy.
Why are bikies being paid to look after refugees in Nauru?
The politics of it is very messy. And the uni party, of course, is the Greens and Independents are kicking up a fuss. They've exposed this and the uni party is just battening down the hatches. So it won't take Pauline off the front pages because neither of the parties. It's okay to demonise minorities and Muslims and Arabs, but who's going to go into bat for foreigners, asylum seekers on temporary visas convicted of a crime at some stage in the last 25 years? So the shades of Tampa are potent. Now, for those that don't remember Tampa, we're talking 2001. It swung an election because history records that in the last election, Labor under Albo swept to power in a landslide. They've got a 50-seat majority. You'd think they'd be using it a little bit better. But just before the 2025 election, the deal got announced. Well, it got announced in February. The election was in May. And the coalition in the lead up to the election, around Christmas 2025, were warming up for a goodies and baddies campaign with News Corp and the other tabloid press, claiming that Labor was weak on borders. So they had to do something because of weak on borders, crime and safety. But Labor pulled the rug out from underneath them. They didn't want an election campaign based on refugees, based on foreigners and human rights. They didn't want to have to go into bat for the rule of law against attacks in the Murdoch media, because the Libs would and were attacking them on NZYQ decision. Why aren't you just forgetting about, the separation of powers was the line from the Murdoch press. And of course Labor then did a tamper and defended their poor treatment of refugees on the basis that these people were criminals. Yeah. There's no, I've done my sentence, I've done my time, they're criminals at some stage, even if it's a driving offence. So the ranters on Sky News had them scared. And so Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, at a presser, started talking about, I've got 3 children and I want them to be safe, and driving hysteria, rather, in the community, that the community was not safe because of these people. They even whacked ankle bracelets on them. Driving offences. Yes, there was abuse, sexual abuse, and yes, there was a murder also too, and drug offences and so on, but no rule of law. Demonisation, you see, works in politics. Demonising minorities and demonising people who aren't true blue, they're not one of us, particularly refugees. Yeah, the disposable people. But the shades of Tampa are unmistakable because, for those of you that remember it, the Children Overboard affair, this was a huge thing in 2001. The Howard government went to the election. There was a controversy involving public allegations by Howard government ministers in the lead up to the 2001 federal election that asylum seekers that had come on a boat had thrown their own children overboard in a ploy to secure rescue and passage in October 2001. Yes, they'd thrown their own children overboard, a bit like babies beheaded of the government's babies beheaded of October 2023. Now, the government's handling of this and other events involving unauthorised arrivals worked to its advantage. The Tampa affair led the government to introduce stricter border protection measures to prevent unauthorised arrivals from reaching Australia by boat. And now they're playing the media hard again. In fact, there was a story that just disappeared magically from the News Corp mastheads, from the News Corp, digital assets. It was a Sam Maiden story, a leak about a drug runner. Now, it couldn't have come from anywhere else, our sources tell us. It had to come from the minister or the department. There was a leak about a drug runner, news.com.au. But it just suddenly disappeared a day later because, one, you're not meant to leak stuff about private citizens, whether they're presumed criminals or not. But also, the culprit at the centre of the story, who they were trying to demonise by leaking it to News Corp, was helping police as an informant in relation to a notorious drug cartel which trades in the marching powder. So, News and the department and the minister put this guy's life in danger, who was also helping the police break a big criminal ring. Besides leaking his private details, breaking the law again, just to make a point, because, you know, goodies and baddies. The media just loves its goodies and baddies. Meanwhile, we pumped $13 billion into Nauru. We can only imagine where that has gone. There's nary even an acute care centre to be seen for that $13 billion. And even if you subscribe to the Tough on Crime flex, Tough on Border school of thought, the waste of money here is egregious. We are involved in a fraud with the government of Nauru, flagrant breaches of international law, and then lying about it. This is not children overboard, this is decency overboard. It's ethics overboard. It's good sense overboard, just political experience. Bear in mind that some of these juvenile offenders are old people now whose crimes were committed decades ago. Stateless people with nowhere to go. And the whole point of the justice system is rehabilitation. That's the point of it. Not to pack people off for 30 years to a Pacific atoll to effectively inter them for 30 years. This Nauru caper is absolutely huge, and we can expect a High Court challenge soon. So thank you to our sponsors from Island Optical and Optical Warehouse for being able to publish a number of stories on this, for funding our journalists. Please like, share and comment in the section below.